Having thus prepared all things as well as I was able, I set sail on the 24th day of September, 1701. When I had gone about 4 leagues to the northward, I descried a small island. I advanced forward and cast anchor on the lee side of the island, which seemed to be uninhabited. I then took some refreshment and went to my rest. I slept well, at least 6 hours, for I found the day broke in 2 hours after I awaked. I ate my breakfast before the sun was up, and, heaving anchor, I steered the same course that I had done the day before, wherein I was directed by my pocket compass. I discovered nothing all that day, but upon the next, about 3 in the afternoon, I descried a sail steering to the southeast. My course was due east. I hailed her, but I could get no answer, yet I found I gained upon her, for the wind slackened. I made all the sail I could, and in half an hour she spied me, then discharged a gun. The ship slackened her sails, and I came up with her between 5 and 6 in the evening, September 26, but my heart leaped within me to see her English colors. I put my cows and sheep into my coat pockets, and got on board with all my little cargo of provisions. The vessel was an English merchantman, returned from Japan by the North and South Seas, the captain, Mr. John Biddle, of Deptford, a very civil man and an excellent sailor. There were about 50 men on the ship, and here I met an old comrade of mine, one Peter Williams, who treated me with kindness, and desired I would let him know what place I came from last, and whither I was bound, which I did in a few words, but he thought I was raving. Whereupon I took my black cattle and sheep out of my pocket, which, after great astonishment, clearly convinced him of my veracity. I then showed him the gold given me by the Emperor of Blefuscu, together with His Majesty's picture at full length, and some other rarities of that country. I shall not trouble the listener with a particular account of this voyage, which was very prosperous for the most part. We arrived in the Downs on the 13th of April, 1702. I had only one misfortune, that the rats on board carried away one of my sheep. The rest of my cattle I got safe ashore, and set them a-grazing on a bowling green at Greenwich, where the fineness of the grass made them feed very heartily, though I had always feared the contrary. Neither could I possibly have preserved them in so long a voyage if the captain had not allowed me some of his best biscuit, which, rubbed to powder and mingled with water, was their constant food. The short time I continued in England, I made considerable profit by showing my cattle to many persons of quality and others, and before I began my second voyage, I sold them for £600. Since my last return, I find the breed is considerably increased, especially the sheep, which I hope will prove much to the advantage of the woolen manufacture by the fitness of the fleeces. I stayed but 2 months with my wife and family, for my insatiable desire of seeing foreign countries would suffer me to continue no longer. I took leave of my wife and boy and girl, with tears on both sides, and went on board the Adventure, a merchant ship of 300 tons, bound for Surat, Captain John Nicholas of Liverpool, commander. We had a good voyage till we passed the Straits of Madagascar, but having got northward of that island, the winds began to blow with much violence, continuing so for 20 days together, during which time we were driven to the east of the Molucca Islands, at which time the wind ceased and it was a perfect calm. But being a man well experienced in the navigation of those seas, the captain bid us all prepare against a storm, which accordingly happened on the day following. During this storm we were carried, by my computation, about 500 leagues to the east, so that the oldest sailor on board could not tell in what part of the world we were. Our provisions held out well, our ship was staunch, and our crew all in good health, but we lay in the utmost distress for water. We thought it best to hold on the same course rather than turn more northerly, which might have brought us into the frozen sea. On the 16th day of June, 1703, a boy on the topmast discovered land. On the 17th, we came in full view of a great island, or continent, for we knew not whether. On the south side whereof was a small neck of land, jutting out into the sea, and a creek too shallow to hold a ship above 100 tons. We cast anchor within a league of this creek, and our captain sent a dozen of his men well armed in the long boat, with vessels for water, if any could be found. I desired his leave to go with him, that I might see the country and make what discoveries I could. When we came to land, we saw no river or spring, nor any sign of inhabitants. Our men therefore wandered on the shore to find some fresh water near the sea, and I walked alone about a mile on the other side, where I observed the country all barren and rocky. I now began to be weary, and seeing nothing to entertain the curiosity, I returned down towards the creek, and the sea being full in my view, I saw our men already got into the boat and rowing for life to the ship. I was going to halloo after them, when I observed a huge creature walking after them into the sea, as fast as he could. He waded not much deeper than his knees, and took prodigious strides, but our men had the start of him half a league, and the sea thereabouts being full of sharp rocks, the monster was not able to overtake the boat. This I was afterwards told, for I durst not stay to see the issue of the adventure, but ran as fast as I could, the way I first went, and then climbed up a steep hill which gave me some prospect of the country. I found it fully cultivated, but that which first surprised me was the length of the grass, which was about 20 feet high. I fell into a high road, for I took it to be, though it served to the inhabitants only as a footpath through a field of barley. Here I walked on for some time, but could see little on either side, it now being near harvest, and the corn rising at least 40 feet. I was an hour walking to the end of this field. There was a stile to pass from this field into the next. It had 4 steps and a stone to cross over when you come to the uppermost. It was impossible for me to climb this stile, because every step was 6 feet high, and the upper stone about 20. I was endeavoring to find some gap in the hedge, when I discovered one of the inhabitants in the next field advancing towards the stile, of the same size with whom I saw in the sea pursuing our boat. He appeared as tall as an ordinary spire steeple, and took about 10 yards at every stride, as near as I could guess. I was struck with the utmost fear and astonishment, and ran to hide myself in the corn, whence I saw him at the top of the stile, looking back into the next field on the right hand, and heard him call in a voice many degrees louder than a speaking trumpet. But the noise was so high in the air that at first I certainly thought it was thunder. Whereupon 7 monsters, like himself, came towards him with reaping hooks in their hands. These people were not so well clad as the first, whose servants and laborers they seemed to be, for upon some words he spoke, they went to reap the corn in the field where I lay. I kept from them at as great a distance as I could, but was forced to move with extreme difficulty, for the stalks of corn were sometimes not above a foot distant, so that I could hardly squeeze my body betwixt them. However, I made a shift to go forward till I came to a part of the field where the corn had been laid by the rain and wind. Here it was impossible for me to advance a step, for the stalks were so interwoven that I could not creep through. At the same time, I heard the reapers not above 100 yards behind me. Being quite dispirited with toil, and wholly overcome by grief and despair, I lay down between 2 ridges, and heartily wished I might there end my days. I bemoaned my desolate widow and fatherless children. I lamented my own folly and willfulness in attempting a second voyage, against the advice of all my friends and relations. Scared and confounded as I was, I could not forbear going on with these reflections, when one of the reapers, approaching within 10 yards of the ridge where I lay, made me apprehend that with the next step I should be squashed to death under his foot, or cut in 2 with his reaping hook. And therefore, when he was again about to move, I screamed as loud as fear could make me, whereupon the huge creature trod short, and looking round about under him, at last spied me as I lay on the ground. He considered a while with the caution of one who endeavors to lay hold on a small, dangerous animal in such a manner that it shall not be able to scratch or bite him. At length he ventured to take me up behind by the middle, between his forefinger and thumb, and brought me within 3 yards of his eyes, that he might behold my shape more perfectly. I guessed his meaning, and my good fortune gave me so much presence of mind that I resolved not to struggle in the least, as he held me in the air about 60 foot from the ground, although he grievously pinched my sides for fear I would slip through his fingers. All I ventured was to raise my eyes towards the sun and place my hands together in a supplicating posture, and to speak some words in a humble, melancholy tone. He appeared pleased with my voice and gestures, and began to look upon me as a curiosity, much wondering to hear me pronounce articulate words, although he could not understand them. In the meantime I was able to forbear groaning and shedding tears and turning my head towards my sides, letting him know as well I could how cruelly I was hurt by the pressure of his thumb and finger. He seemed to apprehend my meaning, for, lifting up the lappet of his coat, he put me gently into it, and immediately ran along with me to his master, who was a substantial farmer, and the same person I had first seen in the field. The farmer received an account of me as his servant could give him, took a small piece of straw, and therewith lifted up the lappets of my coat, which it seems he thought to be some kind of covering that nature had given me. He blew my hair aside to take a better view of my face. He called his hinds about him and asked them, as I afterwards learned, whether they had ever seen in the fields any little creature that resembled me. He then placed me softly on the ground on all fours, but I immediately got up and walked slowly backward and forward to let those people see I had no intent to run away. They all sat down in a circle about me, the better to observe my motions. I pulled off my hat and made a low bow towards the farmer. I fell on my knees and lifted up my hands and eyes, and spoke several words as loud as I could. I took a purse of gold out of my pocket and humbly presented it to him. He received it on the palm of his hand, and then applied it close to his eye to see what it was, but could make nothing of it. Whereupon I made a sign that he should place his hand on the ground. I then took the purse, and opening it, poured all the gold into his palm. There were 6 Spanish pieces of 4 pistoles each, beside 20 or 30 smaller coins. But he seemed to be wholly ignorant what they were. He made me a sign to put them again into my purse, and the purse again into my pocket, which, after offering it to him several times, I thought it best to do. The farmer, by this time, was convinced I must be a rational creature. He spoke often to me, but the sound of his voice pierced my ears like that of a watermill, yet his words were articulate enough. I answered as loud as I could in several languages, and he often laid his ear within 2 yards of me, but all in vain, for we were wholly unintelligible to each other. He then set his servants to their work, and taking his handkerchief out of his pocket, he spread it on his left hand, which he placed flat on the ground with the palm upward, making me a sign to step into it, as I could easily do. I thought it my part to obey, and, for fear of falling, laid myself at full length upon the handkerchief, with the remainder of which he lapped me up to the head for farther security, and in this manner carried me home to his house. There he called his wife and showed me to her, but she screamed and ran back. However, when she had a while seen my behavior, and how well I observed the signs her husband made, she was soon reconciled, and by degrees grew extremely tender of me. It was about noon, and a servant brought in dinner. It was only 1 substantial dish of meat. The company were the farmer and his wife, 3 children, and an old grandmother. When they were sat down, the farmer placed me at some distance from him on the table, which was 30 feet high from the floor. I was in a terrible fright, and kept as far as I could from the edge for fear of falling. The wife minced a bit of meat, then crumbled some bread on a trencher and placed it before me. I made her a low bow, took out my knife and fork, and fell to eat, which gave them exceeding delight. The mistress sent her maid for a small dram cup, which held about 2 gallons, and filled it with drink. I took up the vessel with much difficulty in both hands, and in a most respectful manner drank to her ladyship's health. The liquor tasted like a small cider, but was not unpleasant. Then the master made me a sign to come to his trencher side, but as I walked on the table, being at great surprise all the time, I happened to stumble against a crust and fell flat on my face, but received no hurt. I got up immediately, and observing the good people to be in much concern, I took my hat, which I held under my arm out of good manners, and, waving it over my head, gave 3 huzzas to show I had got no mischief by my fall. But, advancing forward towards my master, as I shall henceforth call him, his youngest son, who sat next to him, an arch boy of about 10 years old, took me up by the legs and held me so high in the air that I trembled every limb. But his father snatched me from him, and at the same time gave him such a box on the ear as would have felled a European troop of horse to the earth, ordering him to be taken from the table. But being afraid the boy might owe me a spite, and well remembering how mischievous all children among us naturally are to sparrows, kittens, and puppy dogs, I fell on my knees, and pointing to the boy, made my master understand as well as I could that I desired his son might be pardoned. The father complied, and the lad took his seat again, whereupon I went to him and kissed his hand, which my master took, and made him stroke me gently with it. In the midst of dinner, my mistress's favorite cat leaped into her lap. I heard a noise behind me like that of a dozen stocking-weavers at work, and, turning my head, I found it proceeded from the purring of that animal, who seemed to be 3 times larger than an ox. The fierceness of this creature's countenance altogether discomposed me, though I stood at the farther end of the table about 50 feet off, and though my mistress held her fast, for fear she might give a spring and seize me in her talons. But it happened there was no danger, for the cat took not the least notice of me, when my master placed me within 3 yards of her. I had less apprehension concerning the dogs, whereof 3 or 4 came into the room, as it is usual in farmers' houses, one of which was a mastiff, equal in bulk to 4 elephants, and a greyhound somewhat taller than the mastiff, but not so large. When dinner was almost done, the nurse came in with a child of a year old in her arms, who immediately spied me and began a squall that you might have heard from London Bridge to Chelsea, after the usual oratory of infants, to get me for a plaything. The mother, out of pure indulgence, took me up and put me towards the child, who presently seized me by the middle and got my head into his mouth, where I roared so loud that the urchin was frightened and let me drop, and I should infallibly have broken my neck if the mother had not held her apron under me. When dinner was done, my master went out to his laborers, and, as I could discover by his voice and gestures, gave his wife a strict charge to take care of me. I was very much tired and disposed to sleep, which my mistress perceiving, put me on her own bed, and covered me with a clean white handkerchief. I slept about 2 hours, and dreamt I was at home with my wife and children, which aggravated my sorrows when I awakened, and found myself alone in a vast room. My mistress was gone about her household affairs, and had locked me in. The bed was 8 yards from the floor. Some natural necessities required me to get down. I durst not presume to call, and if I had it would have been in vain, with such a voice as mine, at so great a distance as from the room where I lay to the kitchen where the family kept. While I was under these circumstances, 2 rats crept up the curtains and ran smelling backwards and forwards on the bed. One of them came almost to my face, whereupon I rose in a fright and drew out my hanger to defend myself. These horrible animals had the boldness to attack me on both sides, and one of them held his forefeet at my collar, but I had the good fortune to rip his belly before he could do me any mischief. He fell down at my feet, and the other, seeing the fate of his comrade, made his escape. After this exploit, I walked gently to and fro on the bed, to recover my breath and loss of spirits. I measured the tail of the dead rat and found it to be 2 yards long, wanting an inch. But it went against my stomach to draw the carcass off the bed, where it lay still bleeding. I observed it had yet some life, but with a strong slash across the neck, I thoroughly dispatched it. Soon after, my mistress came into the room, who, seeing me all bloody, ran and took me up in her hand. I pointed to the dead rat, smiling and making other signs to show I was not hurt, whereat she was extremely rejoiced, calling to the maid to take up the dead rat with a pair of tongs and throw it out the window. My mistress had a daughter of 9 years old, very dexterous at her needle and skillful in dressing her baby. Her mother and she contrived to fit up the baby's cradle for me against night. The cradle was put into a small drawer of a cabinet, and the drawer placed upon a hanging shelf for fear of the rats. This was my bed all the time I stayed with those people, though made more convenient by degrees as I began to learn their language and make my wants known. This young girl was so handy that, after I had once or twice pulled off my clothes before her, she was able to dress and undress me, though I never gave her that trouble when she would let me do either myself. She made me 7 shirts and some other linen, of as fine cloth as could be got, which indeed was coarser than sackcloth, and these she constantly washed for me with her own hands. She was likewise my schoolmistress. To teach me the language, when I pointed to anything, she told me the name of it in her own tongue, so that in a few days I was able to call for whatever I had a mind to. She was very good-natured, and not above 40 feet high, being little for her age. She gave me the name of Grildrig, which the family took up, and afterward the whole kingdom. To her I chiefly owe my preservation in that country. We never parted while I was there. I called her Glumdalclitch, or my little nurse, and should be guilty of great ingratitude if I omitted this honorable mention of her care and affection towards me, which I heartily wish it to lay in my power to requite as she deserves, instead of being innocent but unhappy instrument of her disgrace, as I have too much reason to fear. It now began to be known and talked of in the neighborhood that my master had found a strange animal in the field, about the bigness of a splachnock, but exactly shaped in every part like a human creature, which it also imitated in all its actions, seemed to speak in a little language of its own, had already learned several words of theirs, went erect upon 2 legs, was tame and gentle, would come when it was called, do whatever it was bid, had the finest limbs in the world, and a complexion fairer than a nobleman's daughter of 3 years old. Another farmer who lived hard by, was a particular friend of my master, came on a visit on purpose to inquire into the truth of this story. I was immediately produced and placed upon a table, where I walked as I was commanded, drew my hanger, put it up again, made my reverence to my master's guest, asked him in his own language how he did, and told him he was welcome, just as my little nurse had instructed me. This man put on his spectacles to behold me better, at which I could not forbear laughing very heartily, for his eyes appeared like the full moon shining into a chamber at 2 windows. Our people, who discovered the cause of my mirth, bore me company in laughing, at which the old fellow was fool enough to be angry and out of countenance. He had the character of a great miser, and, to my misfortune, he well deserved it, by the cursed advice he gave my master to show me, as a sight, upon a market day in the next town. I guessed there was some mischief contriving when I observed my master and his friends whispering long together, sometimes pointing at me, and my fears make me fancy I overheard and understood some of their words. But the next morning my little nurse told me about the whole matter, which she had cunningly picked out from her mother. The poor girl laid me on her bosom, and fell a-weeping with shame and grief. She apprehended some mischief would happen to me from rude, vulgar folks who might squeeze me to death or break one of my limbs by taking me in their hands. She said that her papa and mamma had promised that I should be hers, but now she found they meant to serve her as they did last year, when they pretended to give her a lamb, and yet, as soon as it was fat, sold it to a butcher. For my own part, I was less concerned than my nurse. I had a strong hope that I should one day recover my liberty, and as to the ignominy of being carried about for a monster, I considered myself to be a perfect stranger in the country, and that such a misfortune could never be charged upon me as a reproach, if ever I should return to England, since the King of Great Britain himself in my condition must have undergone the same distress. My master, pursuant to the advice of his friend, carried me in a box the next market day to the neighboring town, and took along with him his little daughter, my nurse, upon a pillion behind him. The box was closed on every side, with a little door for me to go in and out, and a few gimlet holes to let in air. However, I was terribly shaken and discomposed on this journey, for the horse went about 50 feet at every step and trotted so high that the agitation was equal to the rising and falling of a ship in a great storm, but much more frequent. My master alighted at an inn which he used to frequent, and after consulting a while with the innkeeper and making some necessary preparations, he hired a crier to give notice through the town of a strange creature to be seen at the sign of the Green Eagle. I was placed upon a table in the largest room of the inn. My little nurse stood on a low stool close to the table to take care of me and direct what I should do. My master, to avoid a crowd, would suffer only 30 people at a time to see me. I walked about on the table as the girl commanded. She asked me questions, as far as she knew my understanding of the language reached, and I answered them loud as I could. I turned about several times to the company, paid my humble respects, and said they were welcome, and used other speeches I had been taught. I took up a thimble filled with liquor, which my little nurse had given me for a cup, and drank their health. I was that day shown to 12 sets of company, and as often forced to act over again the same fopperies till I was half dead with weariness and vexation. For those who had seen me made such wonderful reports that the people were ready to break down the doors to come in. My master, for his own interest, would not suffer anyone to touch me except my nurse, and to prevent danger, benches were set around the table at such a distance as to put me out of everybody's reach. However, an unlucky schoolboy aimed a hazelnut directly at my head, which very narrowly missed me. Otherwise it came with so much violence that it would have knocked out my brains, for it was almost as large as a small pumpkin. But I had the satisfaction to see the young rogue well beaten and turned out of the room. My master gave public notice that he would show me again the next market day, and in the meantime he prepared a more convenient vehicle for me, which he had reason enough to do, for I was so tired with my first journey, and with entertaining company for 8 hours together, that I could hardly stand upon my legs or speak a word. It was at least 3 days before I recovered my strength, and that I might have no rest at home, all the neighboring gentlemen from 100 miles round, hearing of my fame, came to see me at my master's own house. There would not be fewer than 30 persons with their wives and children, and my master demanded the rate of a full room whenever he showed me at home, although it were only to a single family, so that for some time I had but little ease every day of the week, although I was not carried to the town. My master, finding how profitable I was likely to be, resolved to carry me to the most considerable cities of the kingdom. Having therefore provided himself with all things necessary for a long journey and settled his affairs at home, he took leave of his wife, and upon the 17th of August, 1703, about 2 months after my arrival, we set out for the metropolis, near the middle of the empire, about 3,000 miles distance from our house. My master made his daughter ride behind him. She carried me on her lap, in a box tied about her waist. The girl had lined it on all sides with the softest cloth she could get, well quilted underneath, furnished it with her baby's bed, provided me with linen and other necessities, and made everything as convenient as she could. We had no other company but a boy of the house, who rode after us with the luggage. My master's design was to show me in all the towns by the way, and to step out of the road to any village or person of quality's house where he might expect custom. We made easy journeys of not more than 7 or 8 score miles a day. We passed over 6 rivers, many degrees broader and deeper than the Nile or the Ganges, and there was hardly a rivulet so small as the Thames at London Bridge. We were 10 weeks on our journey, and I was shown in 18 large towns, besides many villages and private families. On the 26th day of October, we arrived at the metropolis, called in their language Lorbrulgrud, or Pride of the Universe. My master took lodging in the principal street of the city, not far from the royal palace, and put out bills in the usual form, containing an exact description of my person and parts. He hired a room between 300 and 400 feet wide. He provided a table 60 feet in diameter upon which I was to act my part, and palisaded it round 3 feet from the edge and as many high to prevent my falling over. I was shown 10 times a day, to the wonder and satisfaction of all people. I could now speak the language tolerably well, and perfectly understood every word that was spoken to me. Labors such as I underwent every day made in a few weeks a very considerable change in my health. The more my master got by me, the more insatiable he grew. I had quite lost my stomach and was almost reduced to a skeleton. The farmer observed it, and concluding I must soon die, resolved to make as good a hand of me as he could. While he was thus reasoning and resolving with himself, a gentleman usher came from court, commanding my master to carry me immediately thither for the diversion of the Queen and her ladies. Some of the latter had already been to see me, reported strange things of my beauty, behavior, and good sense. Her Majesty and those who attended her were beyond measure delighted with my demeanor. I fell on my knees and begged the honor of kissing her imperial foot, but this gracious princess held out her little finger towards me after I was set on the table, which I embraced with both my arms and put the tip of it, with the utmost respect, to my lip. She made me some general questions about my country and my travels, which I answered as distinctly and in as few words as I could. She asked whether I would be content to live at court. I bowed down to the board of the table and humbly answered that I was my master's slave, but if I were at my own disposal, I should be proud to devote my life to Her Majesty's service. She then asked my master whether he was willing to sell me at a good price. He, who apprehended I could not live a month, was ready enough to part with me, and demanded 1,000 pieces of gold, which were ordered him on the spot. I then said to the Queen, since I was now Her Majesty's most humble creature and vassal, I must beg the favor that my little nurse, who had always tended me with so much care and kindness, and understood to do it so well, might be admitted into her service and continue to be my nurse and instructor. Her Majesty agreed to my petition, and easily got the farmer's consent, who was glad enough to have his daughter preferred at court, and the poor girl herself was not able to hide her joy. My late master withdrew, bidding me farewell, and saying he left me in a good service, to which I replied not a word, only making him a slight bow. The Queen observed my coldness, and when the farmer was gone out of the apartment, asked me the reason. I made bold to tell Her Majesty that I owed no other obligation to my late master than his not dashing out the brains of a poor harmless creature, found by chance in his fields, which obligation was amply recompensed by the gain he had made in showing me through half the kingdom, and the rice he had now sold me for. That the life I once led was laborious enough to kill an animal of 10 times my strength. That my health was much impaired by the continual drudgery of entertaining the rabble every hour of the day, and that if my master had not thought my life in danger, Her Majesty would not have got so cheap a bargain. But as I was out of all fear of being ill-treated, under the protection of so great and good an empress, the ornament of nature, the darling of the world, the delight of her subjects, the phoenix of the creation, so I hoped my late master's apprehensions would appear to be groundless, for I already found my spirits revive by the influence of her most august presence. This was the sum of my speech, delivered with great improprieties and hesitation. The Queen, giving great allowance for my defectiveness in speaking, was, however, surprised at so much wit and good sense in so diminutive an animal. She took me in her own hand, and carried me to the King, who was then retired to his cabinet. His Majesty, a prince of much gravity and austere countenance, not well observing my shape at first, asked the Queen, after a cold manner, how long it was since she grew fond of a splacknock. For such it seems he took me to be, as I lay upon my breast in Her Majesty's right hand. But this princess set me gently on my feet upon the scrutoire, and commanded me to give his Majesty an account of myself, which I did in a very few words, and my nurse, who attended at the cabinet door, and could not endure I should be put out of her sight, being admitted, confirmed all that had passed from my arrival at her father's house. The king could not conceal his astonishment. He was by no means satisfied with the relation I gave him of the manner I came into his kingdom, but thought it a story concerted between my nurse and her father, who had taught me a set of words to make me sell at a better price. Upon his imagination he put several other questions to me, and still received rational answers. No otherwise defective than by a foreign accent, and an imperfect knowledge in the language, with some rustic phrases which I had learned at the farmer's house, and did not suit the polite style of a court.
End of Side 4.